dating someone, but he doesn't know that I have this debt, and I'm scared to tell him about it because he might not want to marry me.
I think that the reason why it was okay was because when I spoke to him about us being in debt, not us being in debt, me being in debt, he was okay with it because he knew I
any
had
kind of financial challenges that you faced, maybe when it came to combining your finances, or just in the early days when you first got married.
I think the biggest one was probably, us putting our incomes into the one account.
So you pool all the money together and then you allocate it to the bills, and then you give yourself a spending allowance each. But you said that it's the same amount that you both have. Why did you guys decide on that? The reason why I ask is because some people may think that's not fair. So if one person's earning a lot more than the other, or just generally if you're not earning the same amount, how comes one person's getting shortchanged where you're in marriage but you still have that individual mentality? So it's like, what can I get out of this as opposed to what can I give?
You kind of have this pool where it's like, okay, family members are asking to borrow money, but then also you've got your other financial goals as well. And also the question is whether they would pay you back. And I think especially when you do start to lend people money, especially family, it kind of changes the dynamic as well if they haven't paid you back. So we then came to, I guess, a decision where we said...
Hello and welcome to Not Another Money Podcast. Why is it called Not Another Money Podcast, you may be wondering? It's because this is not your typical money show. Get ready for real money conversations and lessons, expert insights from some of our very special guests, and hear some really inspiring stories from everyday people. On this podcast, you're going to learn how to earn more, how to spend less, how to grow the difference, and most importantly, live your best financial life. Hi Veronia, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm really chuffed to have you on here. This is like a new venture for the podcast. I'm now starting to have guests on, and when I was speaking about guests to have on, you definitely came to mind as one of my top candidates because what you do in the finance space is incredible, and your journey so far is incredible, which we're going to dive into, of course, during this conversation. So I was like, no, I have to get Veronia on. So thank you for saying yes to the invitation, and yeah, I'm so glad you're here. So can you introduce yourself to the guys in your own words? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so my name's Veronia Spain, and I'm essentially a money coach, and really the essence of it is to help a lot of women, particularly spenders, be able to save a lot more money and pay off debt, and also start investing as well. And the reason why I'm quite passionate about spenders is because I'm a spender myself. So I am someone who used to basically live paycheck to paycheck. I spent my whole paycheck to the point where I ended up being in over 16 grand worth of debt because of that, with a maxed out overdraft, and yeah, it was just a hot mess. Wow. So I was able to pay that off in about 18 months, and then started focusing on saving a lot more money, investing a lot more money, and then I realized that actually a lot of people struggle with this as well. So I started doing YouTube videos and educating people, and people then wanted a bit more help, and so I started coaching as well. So
Amazing.
that's a bit about me.
It sounds so similar to my own journey as well in terms of how I ended up in financial education. It was my journey through debt and overcoming it that made me want to share what I'd learned with others. So I definitely relate to you a lot in terms of that. So before we dive into the heart of the conversation today, so we're going to be talking all about money and marriage and what that's like in the early stages. But before we do that, I like to do a little bit of an icebreaker with my guests to kind of set the mood and set the scene, and just find out a little bit more about what you would or wouldn't do. So I'm playing this little game of Would You Rather. So I'm not sure if you've played it before, but
I have, yeah.
You have, but it's the money edition. So I'm going to give you some money scenarios, and you'll pick A or B from the scenarios that I give you. So would you rather find a £50 note on the street or get a £100 gift card to a shop that you rarely visit? So £50 note on the street or a £100 gift card for a shop that you rarely visit. Which one would you prefer?
I would say the £50 note.
Yeah. Because
you could probably be more creative with the actual money rather than the gift card.
Love it.
So yeah, that's my
I think I would too, actually. Or actually, no, I think I would go for the £100 gift card. I think I could sell it, get maybe £75 for it.
True.
And then I could go buy what I want.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. I love that.
Yeah. Okay, so would you rather have your rent or mortgage paid for a whole year or receive £15,000 cash?
That's a good one. I would say the cash, because if my rent or mortgage is like £1,000 a month, then that would essentially pay for it. And then I'd have maybe a bit extra to do something else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think I'll go with the same, to be honest. And then, would you rather earn £50,000 a year doing a job that you absolutely love, or £100 a year doing a job that you do not love?
I would do the 50 grand personally, because I think for me, time and just being able to appreciate what I'm doing is a bit more important. And I feel like if I'm doing something that I love, maybe I could do something else to make money elsewhere.
True.
Yeah, I'd go with that.
No, I 100% would go with the £50,000 a year as well, because I feel like your happiness is more important than money.
100%.
So that 100 grand and you're hating your life every single day is not worth it. It's not a transaction that I would like to do. For me, I think peace of mind trumps it all, and just being content and happy in what you do. And £50,000, if you spend it wisely, it can go a long way. You can be okay with that kind of salary, depending on where you live, of course. But yeah, I think you can actually do something with it. All right, cool. And I think the last one we have is, would you rather get free groceries for a whole year? Oh my gosh, I wish. Or £5,000 in cash?
Ooh. Okay, again, I think I would go with the cash, only because based on how much I know I spend on groceries, I'd probably be able to have free groceries for that year plus a bit of change to then use for something else at this moment in time, because like it's just me and my husband. I think I would be I'd basically make it work essentially.
Okay, so you'll take the cash. I think I'll take the free groceries for the year, and my only caveat is that they have to do the shopping for me and deliver the groceries to my house, because that would make my life a lot simpler. Like the grocery shop every week with my 4 boys is a lot.
That's the thing.
A lot of work. So if that groceries includes you doing it, like I just order it online and it gets delivered to my house, or you just do the shop for me, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, cool. Thanks for playing.
No worries.
And then the next thing we have to do before we jump into the conversation, or it's kind of a prelude, I guess you can say, to the combo, is another segment of the show called Not Another Money Moment. So not another money moment, where you share a money moment from your childhood. So a memorable or surprising moment that has significantly impacted your life in one way. So any memory you can think of. It doesn't even have to be from childhood, to be fair. It could even be from adulthood. Just a significant money moment.
So my one was probably when I was about 18 years old. So I was at university and I had actually just got my first car. I'd managed to save up for it. I worked during the summer. But the one thing that I didn't realize is that having a car and maintaining a car is very different, and you need money to be able to maintain the car. So when I took the car for its MOT, they told me that I would have to pay to fix it. Like, it didn't pass the MOT, and they quoted me 700 to...
As a postgraduate? Oh, wow.
I was undergraduate. I was an undergraduate. I hadn't even graduated. I was still at university. And I literally... I cried.
Yes.
Because I was like, how on earth am I supposed to pay for this? And so I ended up having to use part of my overdraft to pay for it, because I had no money. Yeah. And I think that was one of the catalysts where I also... later on had so many different problems with my car where I would have to fix it and I wouldn't have money. But that stuck to me, because that's 700 when you're a student, you have no money. It was a lot.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So I would definitely say, that was a big moment for me.
That's a big money moment. Oh my gosh, I don't even know what I would do in that scenario, to be honest, because I didn't have the bank of mum and dad when I was at uni to draw from. So yeah, I think overdraft would have been my go-to response.
And that was the start of my overdraft
journey. I can imagine. Oh my gosh. Thanks for sharing. That was a really interesting money lesson. And yeah, I could share many, but it's not about me today. It's about you. So let's jump into the heart of this conversation. So I invited you on here to discuss money and marriage, because I know you've been married now. How many years have you been married?
3 years.
3 years. Oh my gosh. So what was your wedding day like, actually?
So the wedding day, it was actually a really nice day. We did have to move it because of COVID. So we originally wanted to get married in June, but they still had the COVID restrictions where you could only have 30 people. So we decided to move it to September, mainly because it wasn't just my wedding. I like to say it was also my mum's wedding.
Oh yeah, of course.
So of course we had to make sure.
Big day.
Yeah. It was her big day as well. But it was really fun. We had the church ceremony, and then we also had the reception, and the weather was lovely as well. So I was really thankful to God for that. So no, it was great.
And what was the wedding planning process like for you guys?
I would say the last 3 weeks were quite stressful, I would say, mainly because you kind of have to wait until people actually confirm that they're coming so that you can know, okay, how many people are going to be at the reception versus the church. So I probably say that was the most stressful part. During the wedding process as well, it was very testing, I would say. I think once you get engaged, that's where things start to pop up, where you don't realize that, you know, you're actually being tested, and this is a completely different season. So things just like my wedding dress as well, I made a mistake with that. I'm very much a people pleaser. There was a time where I thought we went to go and try on dresses. I had no intentions of buying a dress, but then there was a dress that I really liked, and everyone said, you know, oh gosh, this dress is amazing. My mum was like, oh yeah, you should just get it. And they asked me like, are you saying yes to the dress? I had no idea what they were meaning. I didn't even know what they were talking about. I was like, yeah, I love the dress. And then all of a sudden,
that was your dress?
That was my dress. And it was so much more expensive than we had budgeted for. So then when I was speaking to my fiance at the time, I was like, yeah, I've made a mistake. And I just didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to just be like, yeah, I don't want the dress. But then we had a really long conversation, and then I realized I can't justify spending that much on a dress. And so I ended up actually taking it back.
Oh, good.
Yeah, to get it refunded. And then I was quite stern with where I wanted to find my dress. And then we ended up finding a dress, and it was literally 50% cheaper than that dress. And actually it was even a better dress. So
lesson there. You got to stick to your
Big
guns
lesson.
And don't be peer pressured into spending money that you don't want to spend.
100%. And even someone like me, who is someone who, you know, thinks about money a lot, you don't realize how your behaviors can have such a massive impact on your finances.
Absolutely. So then in the wedding planning process, what was that like in terms of you and your fiance? Did you kind of have the same ideas in terms of what you wanted the wedding to be like, or did he kind of leave it to you? What was that like?
No, for some reason my husband was actually pretty involved.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I was quite surprised at that. And to be honest, it was at a time where I was also working my job. I was also doing things like YouTube, and there was a lot going on. So I did kind of have to lean on him for a bit. But I would say that most things I think we agreed on. It was just small things like the type of songs that we might want to sing. That was the kind of things that we maybe didn't disagree on. But he's very much more of a saver as well, and a DIY person. So things like decorations, he was like, oh, we could do it ourselves. He really wanted to do a lot more DIY, and we did do some DIY, which actually saved a lot of money.
Going back to your wedding day then, what would you say in hindsight is something you would have done differently? Like once it was all said and done and the wedding was over, was there anything that you thought maybe you spent money on that you wouldn't have spent money on, or was it in reverse, something that you wish you had invested in that you didn't for your big day?
Yeah, so one of the things actually was we invested in a wedding coordinator for the day. So he was there basically coordinating everything, you know, once we got to the reception. And I found that really helpful because it meant that I didn't have to think about, you know, when is the food coming, what's happening with the speeches. But actually, I think what might have been good is maybe extending them to kind of before that. So maybe like 3 weeks before the wedding, if we'd have got him involved, I think that would have been helpful, because again, those last 3 weeks were quite stressful, where you're trying to remember all the little small things, and you're thinking, oh, who's doing that when it comes to decor, or who's doing that when it comes to food, or just picking up drinks. I think had we had someone that was also there to coordinate, that would have probably made our life a bit easier.
Yes, I can imagine. It's so funny, when I got married, 13 years ago now, that wasn't even a thing. Wedding coordinators, I never even heard of it. I feel like over the last 5 years or so, it's really been taken off, and I see the value in it now because I've got friends who have a wedding planning business, and the weddings that they do, it's just so seamless. The planning process for the bride is just a lot easier, and then on a big day as well, it just runs like clockwork when you have someone coordinating on a day. But yeah, back in my day, it was just hectic.
You just do everything.
The day was just chaotic. Like, we had all these big plans, and then just on a day, everything went to pot. But I still had a great day, but it's just so many things that I had hoped to see in place that weren't in place. So got there on the day, and the decorations didn't really look the way I had thought they were going to look. The caterers came with food, but no caterers. I mean, no servers for servers for the wedding reception. So what ended up happening is my guests ended up going around like the serving area and serving the food to the other guests, because the food was there, no one was there to serve it. So thankfully some people took initiative and helped out in that way. But when I heard about it afterwards, I was mortified. I was like, oh my gosh, that is so bad. You've come to my wedding and you're having to serve. But yeah, thank God for good family and friends, I guess. Okay, so you said you've been married for 3 years now. So talk me through what it was like in the first few months actually of marriage, or even actually let's go back a bit before you got married. Did you guys have conversations about personal finance and how that was going to work, and what did that conversation look like? If so, if you had it, what did it look like?
Yeah, most definitely. So I was at a point where I was kind of on my journey where I was trying to pay off my debt. So I think by the time my husband now proposed to me, I'd almost finished paying off my debt. So I was very much in the like finance, that's in the finance space. So one of the conversations we had was about, okay, what are we going to do once we get married? Are we going to combine finances? Are we going to have, separate accounts and things like that? So we had the conversation about whether we want to combine finances. And I think for me, the reason why I really wanted to talk about it is because finances was something where it was very taboo in my family and his family as well. So people didn't really talk about it. And I thought, actually, we need to go against the grain here. We need to have those conversations. I mean, he already knew that, I'd been in debt and that I was paying off my debt. He kind of had an idea in terms of what my finances were like, but I think it was good for us to have a sit down and just kind of really look at, okay, what's our income? Do we still have debt? What are we trying to focus on? And I think that was really helpful. We also had premarital counselling as well with our church. So one of the things actually is you talk about finances and whether you're going to join or have separate accounts and things like that. And I thought that was really helpful because you get to have some of the quote unquote uncomfortable conversations before the marriage, so that when you do get married, it's not really a surprise. You already kind of know where you stand.
Yeah, that's amazing. So would you say then that it was the premarital counselling that made you have these conversations, or was there something you was already discussing and then that just kind of exemplified it?
Yeah, I would say it was a bit of both, because I think at the point I was also looking at people who had been married and who were maybe successful when it came to their finances. So I used to look at people like Ken and Mary from The Humble Penny, and they had a few videos about them combining accounts and them kind of having this one goal where they work towards it together. And so that really inspired me, where I thought, oh, okay, actually, I know that they are financially independent. They've been able to, do well financially. And I think part of that reason is because of how they dealt with their finances as a couple. So I also want to be able to do something like that. And then to actually hear, my pastor saying that as part of premarital counselling, I was like, okay, well, yeah, this definitely makes sense.
On the right track.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I love that. And I guess, if someone's already given that blueprint, why not follow that blueprint? We don't need to figure it out for ourselves if we can already see examples of people that have been able to do it successfully. So how was it having those conversations? Like, because that is, talking about money is, like you said, it's a taboo subject, right? And being in a position where you're in debt, trying to pay off debt, again, from my experience anyway, when I was in a lot of debt, there was a lot of shame to it, and it's an uncomfortable thing to admit, even to my spouse, even though we were both in a debt together. So our one was slightly different, but even then we didn't sit down and have those conversations about the debt. It was kind of like that elephant in the room that didn't get addressed, because it's just like very awkward to discuss the fact that we've made a mess with our finances. So I'm just wondering what it was like from your position to approach that conversation with your fiance, because I know I've had people ask me questions about that in the past offline where they're like, oh, I'm dating someone, but he doesn't know that I have this debt, and I'm scared to tell him about it because he might not want to marry me. So it's like, what would you say to somebody in that position, and
Yeah.
what was your experience like?
Yeah, it was interesting because, yeah, as you said, I had debt, but my fiance at the time, he didn't have debt. He had like a student overdraft before, but he ended up paying that off quite quickly, and then he was, you know, completely debt free, so he was fine. But I think that the reason why it was okay was because when I spoke to him about us being in debt, not us being in debt, me being in debt, he was okay with it because he knew I had a plan and I was actually working towards paying it off. Had I said, oh, I've got my overdraft, oh well, it's peak, and had
no
he,
plan.
do you get
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
If he'd have seen that and I wasn't doing anything about it,
Yeah.
I think he definitely would have had reservations, because he would have been thinking,
Is this what's serious
is
about
this
life?
exactly. But I think because he saw that I was taking steps to do it and I was working
And you
on
actually
it.
were doing it, and you could see the progress you were making.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was doing it at the time, you know, with my own income. I was focusing on that. I think he was definitely much more relaxed. So when we then started having the conversation about, you know, potentially combining accounts when we got married, I think he was okay with it. It wasn't something where he was like, yes, I definitely think we should do it. But I think that was partly because he hadn't grown up with that. And I hadn't grown up with that either. The only reason why I was quite strong in that, you know, philosophy of combining accounts was because I'd seen other people do it. Yeah. So the conversation, there was just a weird conversation where I wanted our incomes to come into the one account, and then we distribute, you know, everything into, you know, the other accounts. And he was kind of like, well, why can't we just have the income come into both of our separate accounts and then you just move money into it? But again, we had to have that kind of conversation where I thought, well, actually, I like the idea of it coming into one account, because then I see it as, oh, we're now becoming one flesh. And that's as an example of us becoming one flesh. And then, of course, we can like distribute it into like different accounts. So yeah, so it was an interesting conversation. And I think we spoke about it for a couple of weeks. And that was kind of during the time that we were engaged. But then, yeah, we ultimately decided that we were going to, you know, completely combine accounts after that.
No, I love that. And I guess the takeaway for somebody that's currently in debt and has that dilemma is to start working on it. So don't just bring the problem, bring the solution as well to your partner, because then he can see that, you know, he or she, we're not discriminating, whoever, yeah, whichever way it works, you're having that conversation, you're actually doing something about the situation. You're not just kind of, you know, okay, this is the problem, you take it and fix it for me.
Exactly. And I think had I still been in debt whilst we were married, he still would have been okay with it, because he would have seen I was still working on it.
We've touched on it already, but I guess just going into a little bit of detail, if you don't mind sharing, in terms of any kind of financial challenges that you faced, maybe when it came to combining your finances, or just in the early days when you first got married.
Yeah, so yeah, as I mentioned, I think the biggest one was probably, you know, us putting our incomes into the one account. And I would also say when we kind of first got married, just kind of seeing his spending habits versus mine, especially him. He's very much a saver, and he's naturally a saver, hence why, you know, he paid off his debt really quickly, whereas obviously I am naturally a spender. So I think going into the marriage and seeing how we see spending money quite differently, that was, yeah, a very interesting concept where, and we might touch on this later, where a lot of the things he would rather just not spend money on. He would rather just do things himself, whereas I'm like, just
pay and
let's
get
just
it
pay
done.
and get it done. So yeah, I would probably say, yeah, that was one of the challenges we had.
Okay, so you talked about the fact that you both decided to combine your finances, which is actually what me and my husband do as well. And that was what we've done from the onset, for similar reasons to yourself, actually, because I just believe the two of us became one. So if we're one in every other area, why would we not be one in the area of our finances? So yeah, for us, it's a non-negotiable. We combine everything, like we do everything together. But I guess what I'm interested to know is how you actually go about managing your finances together. So obviously you've spoken about the fact that you, from the get-go, combine everything and you do everything together, which is great. But how do you actually go about physically managing the finances? So when it comes to budgeting, paying bills, etc., what does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so in terms of our account, so from our jobs, the money will come into the joint account, and we use that to pay our bills, all of our direct debits, standing orders. And then also we will use that to spend some of the money. So things like transport, groceries, toiletries, eating out, actually, all of that stuff will come out of the joint account. We do also have separate spending accounts as well. So we will allocate the same amount to both of our spending accounts. And that is because obviously he's a saver, I'm a spender. I don't want to have to question what he's spending his bit of money on, and he doesn't want to have to question, mine as well. So we have the separate spending accounts, and that's for like our own personal stuff. So if I'm like going out with my friends, then I'll spend money. I find that he most of the time won't spend his spending money at all. So his money will just be building in the account, and there's me by the end of the month, it's gone to zero. Yeah. And then he's got money just sitting in his account, and I'm like, what exactly are you using this money for? And he's like, don't worry about that, it's my own spending money. So so we have that, and I think that also helps with the kind of individuality that we have, because I think some people, they think that, as soon as you get married, that you lose complete individuality, altogether. Whereas actually there are some things that you can do where, you do still do individual things. Like, he goes out with his friends and I'll go out with my friends. So we then have that spending money. And then also we have separate investing accounts as well. So, if we're investing through a stocks and shares ISA, for example, I've got my own and then he's got his own. And then we will both put the same amount of money into our own investments. And we can use it for like, investing in the stock market, or it could just be for any other investing things that we have. But again, it's the same amount, but it all comes from the joint account. And so how we kind of budget is, I will usually do the budget. So I will usually like put, what we're paying for with bills and spending and savings and investing. And the reason why I do that is because my husband doesn't necessarily budget very much, because he just saves his money. So he just doesn't really need, he's never really needed a budget. Whereas I, on the other hand, I kind of need a budget, because I need to be able to see, okay, how much are we spending on groceries and transport and things like that. So I will usually do the budget, and then he has access to it, and so he'll just let me know if there's any changes that he wants to make. Usually he just kind of just doesn't. He'll have a look and then he'll be like, yeah, that's fine. That's cool. And then I'll then distribute all the money into the accounts, and including savings and things like that. And that's how we do it.
No, that's interesting. And there's something that you mentioned that I just wanted to touch upon just quickly for the listeners in case someone is querying that. So you pool all the money together and then you allocate it to the bills, and then you give yourself a spending allowance each. But you said that it's the same amount that you both have. Why did you guys decide on that? The reason why I ask is because some people may think that's not fair. So if one person's earning a lot more than the other, or just generally if you're not earning the same amount, how comes one person's getting shortchanged, if that makes sense, is what people may perceive it to be. What's your thoughts on that?
So the reason why I wouldn't say someone's getting shortchanged is because, again, it goes back to the concept of us being one flesh. So just because I may earn less than my husband, that doesn't matter, because when the money comes into account, it's our money. If, for example, he lost his job, I'm not then going to say, oh, too bad, sort yourself out. No, it will still be our money. So because of that, everything then gets, split in terms of, spending and investments 50-50, because the income isn't just one person's, it's both of us. It's one income. So that's
no, I totally agree. I just said that because I know some listeners will be thinking that's not fair. Like, if I'm earning more than him or he's earning more than me, then no. And I think it's just a mindset thing that a lot of people may need to overcome, because I think, to be honest, not to call anybody out, but I do think some people can be a bit selfish in that way, like just about me. And I think even in marriage, if you take that idea into marriage, it can be quite dangerous, where you're in marriage but you still have that individual mentality. So it's like, what can I get out of this, as opposed to what can I give? And I think when you're going into the relationship and you have that mindset of what can I get from this all the time and not what can I give, it's kind of setting yourself up for not the greatest time and the greatest relationship. Because like you said, to everything there's a season, right? So just because I'm earning 6 figures today and he's not, or vice versa, anything can happen at any time. Things can change. And in the same way that now you're up and you're looking down on him, or, you know, just thinking like, I earn more than you, so I should get 60% of the money, you get 40. When the shoe's on the other foot and life happens and things change, then you're going to expect that same, you should expect to get that same energy back. So I think definitely it's the one mindset, having that mindset that we are one, that kind of helps you to navigate things financially and not to see money in that way. So that's exactly how it is with us. So when I was on maternity leave, for example, having all these children, I was not earning much at all because I had statutory maternity pay with my employer. When you're getting a job, make sure you look at the maternity packages, guys, because listen, the way I suffered during those years of the statutory maternity pay, because my income just went down to pretty much nothing. And during those times, who was the one that held me up? It's my husband. So I couldn't dare be like, oh, you know, now I'm back, I've arrived, or it just doesn't work like that. We're a team, we work as a team, everything comes together, and I think it just makes for a more smoother time and an easier, I think it just makes life work easier and better when you kind of have that united mindset and just don't see things in an individual way.
Yeah, I agree. And don't get me wrong, this is something that I had to completely unlearn because it wasn't something that I grew up with. You know, like my parents didn't have, you know, the idea of having a joint account where it was just one. So it was a lot of learning and a lot of mindset shifts that I had to do, where I had to be okay with actually, no, you know, we're becoming one, because I was always kind of taught to be, you know, independent and like have your own money. But I think actually when you look at the concept of marriage as well, and, you know, especially, you know, if you have a faith, for example, if you're a Christian, and looking at, you know, the fact that that's a conviction that you have where you do become one flesh, for me, it kind of made sense. Well, you know, if we're going to become one flesh with everything else, why would that not include finances? And so that's really where I got it from, to be honest.
Okay, so another thing I want to kind of touch on is financial goals and setting financial goals as a couple. What does that look like for you guys? Is that something you discuss pre-marriage or once you got married, or what are those conversations been like?
Yeah, so this was something that we discussed before we got married. It was just part of, you know, the conversation about combining accounts and having specific goals as well. So we discussed, you know, things that were life goals but also had an impact when it came to our financial goals. So for example, if we wanted to start a family, you know, would we want to buy a house, for example, or would we want to become financially independent, where you don't necessarily have to rely on your job to pay your bills, so that you can spend a bit more time with your family, like if we, for example, had kids. So those were definitely kind of big conversations that we had. So I think once we then got married, we then had, you know, a specific focus when it came to like our savings and our investments, because we knew what we were working towards. So yeah, we basically had it before marriage, and then obviously once you get married, you continue to have those conversations as well.
So then how did that work in terms of goal setting as a couple, knowing that we're in, as much as two have become one, we still have different ideas of things we want to achieve? How did you come to an agreement on what those goals were, or did you kind of have some combined goals and individual goals? Like, what does that actually look like?
Yeah. So we definitely had like a one combined goal was, for example, financial independence, but there were maybe some smaller goals where it could be like investing goals that we might have. So for example, I wanted to invest a lot more in my business, and he maybe wanted to invest in something else. And then again, how we did it was we said, okay, once the money comes in, we will split that 50-50. So you can put money into what you want to invest in, and the other person can do the same. So it means that although we still have the same overarching goal, how we get there will be some slight individual tweaks, but then, you know, it still kind of works because we still have that ultimate goal at the end of the day.
Okay, good. So I'm just interested to know, have you had any financial disagreement? So like, if there's a financial goal, so I heard what you're saying in terms of investing, you know, you divide it up and then he can invest it as he wishes, and you do the same. But a combined financial goal, like for example, where to live, so buying a house, has there been any kind of thing like that where it's like, you know, you have two different point of views, and how do you resolve that?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Especially, trying to buy a place and find out where to live. Because obviously, again, as I mentioned, my husband's very much a saver. He has the mentality where he's like, oh, I don't want to spend too much on the house. So I don't mind if we live somewhere completely different, like up north. He was looking at houses in Liverpool and was like, oh, do you know we could get a house for like 90 grand? Like, can you imagine if we got that? And he's like, you have family in Liverpool as well, don't you?
Ones that you haven't seen in like 10 years.
Exactly. So there was definitely that conversation where I'm also at the point where I don't want to spend too much on the house, but also I want to be really close to family. I want to be able to have a support network as well. So I had the mentality where I was like, I would prefer to be, closer to London where our family is. Being outside London is fine, but just as long as, we're able to travel to our families quite easily. So we really had to have that conversation because obviously I want to respect him as a husband as well. So I kind of just, honestly, if I'm being honest, Tolu, I had to pray about it. I was like, God, please, just because I will follow him, like he's my husband. But I just had to pray about it, and then I think all of a sudden he just started becoming a lot more open about it, and so now we're like in the process of getting something that's not too far from our families. So
we just take it to the Lord in prayer.
Honestly, because
and then suddenly it becomes their idea. And
exactly.
It's like, actually, babe, I've been thinking.
Exactly.
You're like, oh, really? You've been thinking?
Yeah.
You don't know that. That's the Holy Spirit. In the first few years of marriage, then, what would you say? So you've been married 3 years now. I'll say in the first year. In fact, no, not even the first year. Full stop. Since you've been married, what would you say the biggest financial lessons that you've learned are so far?
I would say the biggest lesson is that you can't be afraid to be, no, actually scrap that, is to be okay with being intimate with your finances, even if it seems really difficult. Like if, for example, we're having conversations about our income, or, if I still had debt, I think really being vulnerable with that definitely helps, because what I found is that for many people, the source of conflict, especially when it comes to early marriage, actually is finances. It's one of the biggest things, especially if you haven't had that conversation before you get married. So I think the more you're able to talk about it, the more you're able to kind of make it more of a casual subject. I think you're then hopefully less likely to have big arguments around finances, because you're having those conversations regularly. And I would say, that's something that we try to do quite intentionally. So for example, we have something called like a family day, where it's like a family meeting that we have. It's only us two, but we still call it a family meeting. Yeah, we're still a family, where we then talk about our finances. We talk about, what happened with spending during the month, and, maybe where things went wrong or where things went right, going back to goals as well. But as well as that, it's not just about the finances. We'll then also talk about other things to do with our marriage, even right through to like sex, for example. So because those are quite intimate conversations, we like to be quite intentional about it, but then it means that it's just a bit easier. So if something does happen, for example, if like we need to lend money to a family member, again, we're able to have those conversations. We're able to have those discussions because we're having it so often.
I love that. And yeah, we do the same thing. Our ones, we call it a money date, but yeah, we go on our quarterly money dates, and then weekly as well. We do the weekly check-ins. Yeah. Very sad, but it's very it's very necessary to have those conversations, because like you said, if you don't have those conversations, things just happen and life happens, and you think what where your partner's at, but actually you don't, because you haven't communicated with them on the subject. So I think the more we can be transparent and have those open conversations, the more we can build successfully together. Because I think if you don't have these conversations, you don't realize where you both are. So it might be you're thinking this is what we're doing, and your partner's thinking something else, and then there's no like kind of synergy with the two of you. So no, I like it. I applaud it. Family days, very important, very necessary, I would say. So if you could go back in time, back to a younger Veronia, pre-married or pre-marriage rather, what advice would you give her in terms of preparing for marriage and preparing financially for marriage?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would probably say the advice I would give is you don't need to wait until marriage to start working on your financial position. And I think, had I known about, debt and saving and investing earlier, I think that would have given me much more confidence, again, going into marriage, where I'm not then having to rely on one person. Because I think sometimes what happens in the marriage is maybe one person is considered financially literate and then the other person isn't. And so because the other person doesn't think they are, they kind of leave it they take a back seat and they leave it. But what people don't realize is that you both have different strengths. And so it's so important for both of you to be confident in that and utilize both of your strengths. So, for example, when it comes to investing, the way my husband invests is very different to how I invest. But again, we both have strengths because he likes to take a lot of risk. I don't. But it could get to a point where all of his risk means that, you end up losing all the money.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important to do that work if you can before, because if, for example, his risk means that, we lose some of the money, we won't lose everything because I would also have been, doing the work to do the investing as well. So I think, that's probably the biggest one, is that, don't be afraid to start focusing on your finances even before you get married, because once you then get married, hopefully you have a bit more confidence so that you guys can both tackle it together and lean on each other's strengths, essentially.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think the best time to prepare is before it happens, right? So don't wait until when you get to marriage to be like, okay, now I'm going to get my finances in order, because these things are habitual as well. So it takes time to build those habits. So I think, the sooner you can get on top of it, the better. And like you said, don't think because I'm not good with money now, I'm never going to be good with money, because you can work on it. You can change that narrative and get good with money just by applying yourself, just by learning, just by reading books. Because I mean, you've gone from being in how much debt to being debt free to now having investments. And
me that even does the budget. It's me that does the budget of all people.
Same.
So
so funny. The synergy so much, because that's the same for us as well. I was the big spender. In fact, I still am a spender at heart, let me not lie. But I just have to rein myself in all the time and refer back to my budget, and just I have my spending pot which I can spend on whatever I want. Thank God for that. But other than that, if I had my way, I would probably just want to spend it all. But no, God's been helping me, and I'm a lot more disciplined, and I have the budget, and I'm the one, like you said, that now manages the budget, and we have our weekly check-ins, etc. So don't just think, this is the end of my story, I'm bad with money. No, actually, you can change that if you apply yourself to learning. And I definitely would agree with that. Prepare yourself in that season before marriage. Don't just wait until marriage to get your finances in order. Okay, so being a bit nosy, looking ahead into the future, what are some of the financial goals that you and your husband are working towards, would you say?
So at the moment, we're currently in the process of buying our house, because so we've been looking at, again, where we want to live and having conversations around that. So we're at that process. And then after that, to be honest, I think it will go back to hopefully probably more investing, because that was something that we did when we first got married. We were investing a lot more money, but then that kind of switched over to, okay, let's just make sure we've got like a good deposit for the house. And then from there it will be probably investing, but also overpaying on the mortgage as well. So I think that will probably be quite a big goal once we get that, because I'm one of those people, I'm very forward thinking. So I'm like, okay, how much, if we overpay by this amount, how soon can we be mortgage free? So I'm already thinking about that next. I've even forgotten about buying the house. That's just kind of like, okay, we're in the process of that. But my next thing is like, okay, let's start thinking about actually overpaying on the mortgage and things like that. So what's the reason that you're thinking of overpaying the mortgage? Because that's a topic that gets talked about a lot in the personal finance space online, and different people have different views on it. So I'm just interested to know what makes you want to become mortgage free sooner than 25 plus years. So again, it will come back to like the financial independence part. So I think the idea of then not having to, if we don't have a mortgage, it means we don't have to actually make as much money, which means we then have more time to do other things. And also, if we do make money, we can then invest it again to become, much more financially independent. So really, that is the biggest thing. I knew that overpaying the mortgage would be part of our process to, you know, that ultimate financially independent goal. And I know like some people will be like, oh, you should invest it and stuff. And it's not to say that we won't be investing, like we will be investing as well, but yeah, that's just our preference, like just from our own goal. It's not a math thing, like it's not a logical thing. It's just, yeah, this is just a life goal that I would like us to, well, we both would like to have. So
no, to be fair, we have a similar goal as well in terms of wanting to pay off our mortgage sooner than the 30-year term I think it is we currently have. And I think for me, like you said, you can't put a calculation on that. It's not like a mathematical equation that makes sense, but I think you can't put a price on peace of mind. And I think that's the biggest thing for us, is having that security. Like once the house is fully paid off, we know that that's our home. We can do what we like, we still have somewhere to live, so then we can afford to take a lot more risk in terms of business and all the rest of it. Because I think because we have a young family as well, I can't just afford to lose that home. So it's like I'm going to do everything I can to pay it off sooner, and then I could take a lot more calculated risks in terms of business, and that just knowing that our costs will go down a lot more, because our mortgage at the moment for us is our biggest expense every single month. So the thought of not having to pay a mortgage, I'll literally be a millionaire. Okay, not a millionaire, but it will widen that gap so much in terms of our disposable income on a monthly basis, and then that money we can take it and invest it at a faster rate once we become mortgage free. So I think for me it's a big goal for us to achieve mortgage freedom sooner. I don't want to wait until I'm 65, retired, and still be paying for my mortgage. Like, exactly, that's not what I want for myself. But again, everyone is different, and I guess personal finance is personal, so you have to do what works for you. But yeah, for us it's definitely a big goal of ours too. Another topic that I see spoken about a lot online as well is family, the cost of extended family. So in-laws a lot of the time seem to be a subject of contention, in terms of people saying, for example, my husband gives money to his mum and I don't like it, or how can I stop him from giving all our money to his family back home? So what's your experience of that, or what is your take on that, or any advice that you'd give to anybody in a similar scenario? How would you say to approach it?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because when we got married, for example, I'm used to giving a small amount to my family, and he was also doing the same. So I think once we got married, we had the discussion of whether we would keep doing that. So we decided to do it just as part of our giving. But I think where it got a bit more difficult is, for example, if family members were asking to borrow money from us. And you know, you kind of have this pool where it's like, okay, family members are asking to borrow money, but then also you've got your other financial goals as well. And also the question is whether they would pay you back. And I think especially when you do start to lend people money, especially family, it kind of changes the dynamic as well if they haven't paid you back. So we then came to, I guess, a decision where we said we do not actually lend money to family. What we are going to do is we're going to gift money to family. So we will gift the amount that, you know, we can essentially afford, and we would never expect it back. Like if our family wants to pay us back, then sure, that's a bonus, but we don't expect it back. Because I think the fear that I had is if you lend money to a family member, they then don't pay you back, and then you're kind of like, oh, but that's your family member. Why haven't they paid us back? We're supposed to use that money for something else. And then you start to have disagreements with your partner because of that. And I didn't want any of that. So we just decided, you know, if a family member ever asks for money, we'll just gift it to them. Like based on, you know, the amount of money that we have. If we have money, we just gift it to them, and then that means that we can forget about it. And I think that was, for us personally, that was probably the best way to go about it.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think I would say as well that it's not a bad thing that you want to be a blessing to family members. So I don't think it's something necessarily as a spouse that you should like resent the other person for wanting to do, because I mean there's worse things that they could be wanting to do with the money, right? So the fact that they want to be a blessing to their family members, it's a noble thing, it's a positive thing, so don't see it in a negative way. But what I would say is to have open conversations with your partner about the giving and about what is affordable, because like you said, you want to give from what you have available to give, right? You don't want to give at the expense of whatever else you're working together towards as a family unit. So we want to make sure that, okay, this is what we can afford to give. And I like what you said in terms of we're giving it, it's a gift, it's not money we expect to receive back, because then when we receive it back, then it's like extra money because you had budgeted for it or planned for it. But I think when the money's just being taken and given, and we still haven't got money to pay bills, or, you know, we haven't got money to do the things we're working towards, then it becomes an issue. So I think it boils down to having these open conversations with your spouse about this issue or about this subject matter, and just see it not as a negative thing, because it is a positive thing that they want to be a blessing, but we just have to do it in a responsible way that doesn't negatively impact what we're working towards as a family unit. So, totally
and you will be forced to do it, especially if you have combined accounts as well.
True.
So again, that brings up the conversation of being okay with having that conversation about money, which can be a positive and a negative depending on how people see it. But actually, I kind of see it as a positive, because again, it means that you're making decisions together and you're deciding, okay, how much do we want to give? So yeah.
So what's your views on what do they call it? They call it something. This account. It's like a I think it's a swear word, so I won't say the word, but I think it's like basically like a contingency fund account, for want of a better word, where you put money aside just in case, like a just in case account. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Do you have a just in case account?
As in from the other person?
So exactly. So, you know, obviously you combine everything and then you get your spending pot. So would you take some of that spending pot and put it in the just in case account? Because I know that is again quite a popular thing that people do, and I just wanted to know what you think about that.
For me personally, I wouldn't do it, because I think when I went into marriage, I did see it as, you know, this is a covenant with God, so I have to put my whole self into that marriage. So I don't know, sometimes I think if you have like a contingency or a just in case, the question is, why do you have that? Is it because you maybe don't trust your partner? So I think you kind of have to be quite real with yourself to see, okay, why do you think that you would need it? And I think, again, that partly comes back from, you know, maybe some of the trauma. So, for example, if your parents aren't together, they've maybe divorced, you know, mine had. So you maybe would think that I would have like a just in case account. But I don't know. I think, again, it was just me unlearning a lot of things, where I realized, you know what, if I'm marrying this person, it's because I believe that God has put me on this earth to be with that person. So, yeah, I wouldn't tell anyone not to have one or to have one, but for me personally, I don't have one. I didn't didn't see the need.
No, I don't have one either, to be honest. And again, for the same reason, I didn't see the need to have it. Call me naive, which some people probably would.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. But I guess, like you said, for me, when I entered into marriage, it was a permanent thing. Like, this is it. Like, it's like jumping out of the airplane and that's it kind of thing. I wasn't thinking of a backup plan or anything like that. So for me, I don't know, having that secret account wouldn't sit well with me, because I feel like it is a bit dishonest in a way, because especially if he's not aware of this secret account. So it's not, it wouldn't sit well with me doing that, because I just feel like I'm being dishonest to my spouse, because it's like I'm living a secret life, or I'm doing things in secret, and I think things should be done in the light. So I wouldn't do that. But at the same time, I do appreciate everyone's situation and circumstances is different, and for somebody to be in that position to have that account, it could be that this situation can be quite dire, and it's you know, and you're trying to get out, and that's you preparing for exit. So that's a bit different to like what you were saying in terms of it being more of a trauma response. And if it is more of a trauma response, then that is something you probably want to unpack, because it might not be the most healthiest way to be in marriage, because that will probably show up in other ways in the marriage too. So not only are you putting money aside in a secret way, but you're probably also not presenting your whole self in that marriage as well. There's going to be reservations in other areas as well that you might not be aware of. So I think it's something you want to unpack. So therapy, counselling, speak to your pastor, speak to somebody about that, because I don't think it's the most healthiest way to live your life, because you're not free, and you should be free.
I agree. And I think it's why, if you're not married yet, that's why you have to have those intimate conversations before you get married. So you know, actually, and obviously it's hard, because you know, you may not 100% know the person. But again, if you're someone who has faith, that's where you need to be praying to God about that, making sure that this is the person that you are supposed to be marrying, having those conversations so that you can be open about it and be okay once you do once you do
Make
get
that
married.
decision. Okay, so you've crossed the 3-year mark of marriage now. Do you know what the 3 years stands for? You know, every year they have like a different theme. So it's like cotton 1 year, diamond 1 year.
Oh yeah, no, I don't know the
To be
third
fair,
year.
I lost count after the first year, I think, as well. So not to worry about that. But anyway, you're 3 years into marriage, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of growth in yourself over the last few years. And the Veronia sitting here today has come a long way from the Veronia 3 years ago. So what advice would you give to anybody that is about to get married, newlyweds, and wanting to approach the conversation of finance with their spouse, or just in general, any advice you'd give to newlywed, somebody about to embark on that marriage journey?
Yeah, I would say if it's a new topic for you, don't try to make it so serious where you don't feel like you can have that conversation. So it could be that maybe when you do want to talk about, you know, your finances or like how much debt you have, maybe you do it where you go out to eat, for example, or you're just like in a nice environment so it doesn't just feel so tense, and hopefully that will allow you to kind of ease up. And I think having the conversation before will help you to navigate how you'll have the conversation when you get married as well, because if you're both open before, then hopefully that means like once you get married you'll still be able to have those kind of conversations. And if you feel like, oh, actually I can open up to my partner about, you know, if I am in debt but I'm working to pay it off, then that hope and they support me with that, then hopefully it means that actually once we get married, that support will also be there as well. So hopefully it will then start to alleviate some of those fears. I think sometimes if you just go in blind, it can be quite difficult when you then first get married, because then you're like, oh, actually I don't really want to talk about my finances. But then how can your partner support you if you're too scared to talk about it? So that's what I would say. You know, again, it doesn't have to be in this rigid place with like your spreadsheet open. It could just be, you know, I'm starting to work on my debt. This is how much I have. This is kind of the plan. And you might be surprised, like your partner might say, oh, actually, you know, have you thought about doing this with your debt? And again, once you get married, and if you do decide to combine accounts, both of you can tackle that together, and you could potentially pay that debt off much more quicker as well. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I think that's really good advice. Hope you guys are taking it. No, it's good. Okay, so then just finally, Jen, just to close, any final remarks or any final thoughts or anything else on this topic of money and marriage that you want to share?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would say is that it's really interesting because when we have the topic of marriage, not a lot of people do talk about finances, but it's one of the leading causes of divorce. So really and truly, it should be one of the most important topics that you're talking about. So I think I'm just trying to stress that this is something that we have to take seriously. It is something that, you know, we have to communicate. Whether you decide to join accounts or you decide to have separate accounts, it's so important to have the conversation, just like you would have conversations about, you know, whether you might want to start a family in the future or where you might want to live. Again, talking about money, talking about finances should be, I personally think, a key topic in that, because yeah, again, it's one of the leading causes. So, you know, for us to be able to really work on that, we have to be open and honest about it.
No, I totally agree. I think well said. To be honest, though, it's so important to have these money conversations, and I think the more you talk, the more easier it becomes. I think the initial idea of approaching that subject is more daunting than the actual conversation itself. So I think sometimes we make things bigger in our head than they end up being in reality. So I think when you actually start talking and just express how you're feeling and where you are right now, and you know what your thoughts are, what you may be struggling with, or any reservations you may be having, when you just start communicating about those things, you'll be surprised that it just becomes a lot easier. So I think we make things a lot bigger in our heads sometimes than they end up being in reality. So I think absolutely just have that conversation with your spouse and have that transparency, and don't be afraid to speak up, because I think if you're transparent in every other area, I mean, this person sees you naked all the time, for crying out loud. So why would you not want them to see your financial nakedness as well? So I think, yeah, definitely have those open conversations. Don't be afraid to broach the topic. It might be difficult at first, but I think avoiding it can be even worse. So sometimes we don't approach subjects because we don't want contention or we don't want arguments, and ignoring it is just going to make the elephant bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So we have to face it and open up and have those conversations and do the work. And eventually, like I said, the more you have these conversations, the more you work through things together as a couple, it does become easier, and it actually strengthens that bond and it strengthens that unity when you come together and tackle these things together. So at first it might be a contentious thing, but after a while, the more you work through it, it just, yeah, it helps you grow as a couple, and it helps you grow as an individual as well, because we can't all agree on every single thing in this life. That's not how life works. So we have to learn how to resolve conflict. We have to learn how to see other people's point of views and work together on things. So yeah, I think just keep those lines of communication open and just have those regular conversations, and I think you'll be just fine.
Yeah, totally agree.
So I guess just finally, before we close, then I'll give you an opportunity to ask me any questions that you may have. Do you have any questions for me before we go?
Yes, my biggest question that I have is how you're able to navigate your finances with a growing family.
Listen, a growing family and a recent redundancy. So you can imagine it has been a big challenge for us. And I think that's where having emergency funds and sinking funds in place has been a game changer and has really helped us to navigate this season. I think planning and preparation as well. So with my third son, was that the one that wasn't planned? Yeah, my third one wasn't. Sorry, that sounds so bad. I love you, son. But that was the surprise one. But with my fourth one, there was a lot more planning that went into it. So we were able to prepare financially for it. But what I would say is that they get a lot more expensive as they get older. And that's one thing I didn't prepare for and anticipate, the fact that actually these children cost a lot of money. They cost money when they're born, but as they get older, the costs increase. I thought the cost will go down when they're out of nappies, but actually no. Now we've got things like after school clubs, they've got extracurricular activities that they do, they've got tutoring, they've got Kumon, like they've got all these things that they do, which requires a lot more money and requires a lot more time as well, because it's just the juggling act trying to get them from this place to that place and manage my diary with my husband's to make sure it's all running. And I think, to be honest, it's all the grace of God how we're doing it. Like, I don't have the answers. Even sometimes I sit back and I look at my life and I'm like, Tolly, how do you do it? And I genuinely don't know. I think it's just the grace of God. But I think in terms of financially, it is budgeting. Like, that's why I talk about budgets all the time, because if we hadn't changed our financial situation 5 years ago and we were in the financial position we are now in terms of income, we'll be screwed. Like, it'll be a wrap. But because we had learned how to budget from all those years ago when we were in debt, and we'd learned how to live on a low income, and we don't really do big lifestyle, because of that, we are able to manage financially and put money towards the things that really bring us value, like seeing our children flourish and investing in their future. So for me, it's making sacrifices on the things that are more materialistic and putting the money towards bigger goals and bigger dreams that we have for our family. So we have a vision for our children. Obviously, they're going to do what they want to do in life, but we have a vision for where we're trying to take them, and that requires finances, and that does require making sacrifices in other areas in order to achieve those goals. But for me, I don't even see them as sacrifices as much now, because I feel like my mindset has just shifted, because my priorities have shifted. So because my priorities have shifted, where once upon a time I just used to spend all my evenings on ASOS, now it rarely happens, because I don't have the time, number one, and because there's other things that I know take higher priority in terms of what I want to put my finances towards. So I think, yeah, for me, the main thing is changing my financial perspective, having bigger goals and bigger priorities. Financial goal setting is a big thing as well. I think for us, because we have financial goals that we're trying to achieve, again, that helps us to stay on track, and it's just working towards those bigger goals of like yourself, financial freedom, but also giving our children the best future that we can possibly give them.
Of course.
So hopefully somewhere in there was an answer.
Yeah,
So I feel like I went
no,
around and around, but hopefully we arrived at an answer to your question.
No, really good advice. Really good advice. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that was it. Any closing remarks? Any final statements? Where can we find you? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing, and
Yes. So I am on YouTube, so you can find me on YouTube, Veronia Spain, and also Instagram as well, the same thing, Veronia Spain as well. And I also do like weekly emails, so you can find that on my YouTube, and I offer one-on-one coaching. So yeah, and I think we potentially will be adding on couples coaching as well, because it's something that we started kind of doing in our church, and actually I thought that maybe people might need help with that too.
They probably do. So no, that's amazing. Definitely, guys, get in touch with Veronia. But no, thank you so much for today's conversation. I feel like so many of our listeners are going to benefit from the gems that you have dropped in this conversation. So I really appreciate you. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on today's show. And yeah, I really appreciate you.
No, thank you so much for having me. I definitely feel really privileged to be one of your guests on your podcast, because I know it's going to end up being amazing.
Yay, amazing. No, thank you.